Hello, everyone. This is Mrs. G's Story Time, and we are reading Patricia St. John's book, The Tanglewood Secret, by permission of Moody Publishing Company. And we are at Chapter 7, and it is called An Unfortunate Tea Party. What do you think is going to happen? Well, let's find out. We went out flower selling nearly every afternoon after that for a week and earned nearly 15 shillings. We never again met anyone quite so nice as the Birdman, but quite a lot of people seemed pleased with our flowers and bought bunches. We told Terry what we were doing, and he didn't mind at all. In fact, he helped us quite a lot because he knew just what colors to put together and how to arrange them. So that Aunt Margaret should not see the flowers, we kept the bucket by a gap in the hedge, and Terry would sometimes arrive there late in the evenings and add a few of his flowers to ours. We had shown him our private gap as a sign of friendship, and he used to creep in and out and leave notes for us. His spelling was bad, but that was not a worry to us at all. Most mornings we'd find a scrap of paper that would say, "Come, to bring This meant that Terry would be waiting for us at the wigwam and would need some food. It was towards the end of the week when we were sitting at dinner that my aunt remarked, "I'm going out to tea this afternoon, Philip and Ruth, and I shan't be back until about 6. You may take your tea out and not come back till supper if you like." We both did like very much, and we kicked each other joyfully under the table. "Who are you going out to tea with, Auntie?" asked Philip, who always took a polite interest in what other people were doing. "With an old friend of mine who has come to live here just lately," answered my aunt. "Later on, I should like to introduce you to her. She is very fond of children and has often asked about you. She knew your mother, too." "Will she ask us out to tea, too?" I asked with interest. I like going out to tea because we always had such nice things to eat. "If she did, you would have to behave yourself rather better than you usually do," replied my aunt. And I frowned and wiggled with annoyance. Why should she always spoil even nice, good things like going out to tea with silly remarks like that? Of course, I always behaved nicely when asked out to tea. I was far too shy not to, and in any case, I would rather fun having grown-ups say how well-mannered we were. Quite a change, too, as far as I was concerned. When dinner was over, my aunt took me off to the kitchen to help dry the dishes, which I did at lightning speed, and ran off the moment I'd finished. Aunt Margaret called after me to come back and put the cloth away tidily, but I pretended not to hear and scuttled through the front door. Philip was waiting near the gap, looking rather worried, with the basket in his hands. "Come along," he said. "We must get well away before Auntie starts. We might meet her, and we forgot to ask which way she was going." "Oh, I think she's going down the town way," I answered carelessly. "I heard her say something to Uncle Peter about it. Someone she was going to see down Beach Road." "Perhaps it was somebody else," asked Philip. No, I replied. "It was sure to be the same one. She doesn't go and see many people. She's too busy." Philip chewed a piece of grass thoughtfully. She's always working, isn't she?" he remarked at last. "Sometimes I think we should help her a bit more than we do. After all, it's quite kind of her to have us live with her, and we're not her children." "Oh, I don't know," I answered quickly, for this sort of talk was not at all to my liking. "I helped with the drying and dusting sometimes, and you do the wood for Uncle Peter, and we both pick fruit in the summer and shell peas and things. After all, we're not grown-ups, and children shouldn't have to work during holidays, and we do quite enough work in the school year." I could see by the look on Phil's face that he was not quite satisfied, so I changed the subject as soon as possible. We went down a country road to a collection of rather pretty cottages. At the first 4 houses, everyone bought something, and we earned over 2 shillings. It was a peaceful sort of day on which no one would expect anything to happen. So we were taken completely by surprise, never dreaming that afternoon would turn out as it did. We wandered up a lane to have tea and sat on the gate looking over a bright buttercup field where the sleepy brown cows chewed their cud and swished their tails lazily. We munched our bread and jam as peacefully as the cows and almost as silently, for Philip was not really a talkative boy. It was still only 4 o'clock, so we decided to go back to the road and try some more cottages. We were going to do our best today and then go back to Terry in the woods tomorrow, for we were getting a little tired of flower selling. Still, it was encouraging to be finishing up so well, and on reaching the road, we approached the next cottage hopefully enough. It was a very nice one, long, low, and built with gray stone. We walked up the path along to the front door, and on our way we passed under a window and heard the clink of china and the sound of ladies' voices. It sounded as if some sort of a tea party was going on, and the ladies at the tea parties are usually in a rather good mood, as Philip wisely remarked. We rang the bell, and the lounge door opened immediately. A young lady came out and stood looking at us for a moment before asking us what we wanted. When we held out the basket and asked her to buy some flowers, she started to smile. "Wait a minute," she said. "Instead of answering our question, I must ask my mother. And then you must come and show me what you've picked." She disappeared back into the lounge, and we heard her merry laugh as she told her mother about us. "Such a cute little couple pretending to be flower sellers," she heard her say. "The boy has a face like an angel, and the girl, she looks like a little wild thing. You must see her for yourselves, and I'll bring them in." She came back smiling and held out her hand. "Come in for a moment," she said, "and show my mother and aunt your basket. I'm sure they would like to buy some cowslips. You shall have a biscuit each, too." And we're just having tea. We trotted in after us, suspecting nothing, and then we both stopped, still suddenly in the doorway, struck with horror. There were 4 chairs placed around a little table in the window so that the ladies were sitting with their backs to us. In one chair sat a tall, elderly lady who was evidently the mother, for she was pouring the tea. Next to her sat the aunt, and next to her was an empty chair that was about to be occupied by the young lady. Next to that was a high-backed armchair with large sides, and from it came an unmistakable voice of Aunt Margaret. "The little girl is very rough," said the voice, "and I shall be only too glad when her mother comes and takes her off my hands." "Run," I whispered to Philip. "Oh, Phil, run quick." But Philip, in his usual slow fashion, had not yet realized what had happened. He stood there blinking as though he were in another puzzling dream, and I tried to think of another way to escape. There was one small hope. If we walked in and stood behind my aunt's chair, it was quite impossible for her to see us, for the chair was very big. If we were asked to speak, she would certainly know it was us. However, it was our only chance. As the young lady beckoned us to come forward, wondering why we were hesitating, I took Philip's hand and led him to the only safe spot in the room. The older lady smiled and tried to make us feel at home. She held out her hand for a bunch of cowslips. I took 2 steps forward, leaned right over, and pushed them at her, and scuttled back to my hiding place like a frightened rabbit to its burrow. The girl looked rather surprised, for we had not seemed shy at the doorstep. Yet here we were behaving in the most peculiar fashion, and Philip was standing like a stuffed dummy with his mouth open. "What beautiful flowers," said Mrs. Sheridan, examining them. "We shall have to go exploring and find some, too. Whereabouts did you pick these, children?" There was a dead silence. Neither of us dared speak. And I heard a rustle in the armchair as though my aunt was about to turn around and examine these strange dumb children behind her. And if her head suddenly appeared over the top, I knew I would scream. So I replied in a hoarse whisper, in the hollow by the stream." "By the stream," repeated Mrs. Sheridan. "Yes, I might have known these would grow near water. I shall certainly buy a bunch. Fetch my purse, Isabel, and give these 2 children a biscuit each before they go." The girl held out the plate, but to reach it we should have to walk out in the open. We shook our heads frantically, but she just thought we were being polite. "Come along," she said, laughing. "They're very nice biscuits." Hopelessly, I took 2 steps forward, leaned over as far as I could to grab 2 biscuits. But as I did, I saw my aunt's hat move, and I leapt backwards, jumped into a small cake stand, and sent it flying. My aunt's head appeared around the side of this chair, and she saw me. I can only dimly remember what happened next. I heard my aunt shout, "Philip! Ruth! What is the meaning of this?" Mrs. Sheridan said, "Pick them up, Isabel. They're butter side down all over the carpet. Don't let them get trampled in." And I saw Philip move back and trip over Isabel, who was picking up the buttered buns, and I noticed that her face looked as though she was trying to laugh. I remember everybody apologizing for everybody, and my aunt saying that she could not understand it a great many times. Mrs. Sheridan was saying it was nothing to worry about and we were to forget all about it. The next thing that comes back clearly to me was that my aunt was turning to us with all the fuss had died down and telling us that she was taking us home to punish us most severely. But before we went, we were to come forward and tell Mrs. Sheridan how sorry we were for behaving so badly. Philip had recovered by now, and he stepped forward immediately and looked into Mrs. Sheridan's face. He was truly sorry for having spoiled such a nice tea party, especially when Aunt Margaret went to so few, and he said so earnestly and politely that everyone was charmed. Even my aunt looked pleased, and if only she would have stopped there, all would have ended peacefully. But now she turned to me and asked me coldly what I had to say for myself. I don't quite understand to this day why I was so angry, but while Philip was talking, I had decided that my aunt was a mean woman. There was no need to have recognized and owned us. She should have never shown we belonged to her, and then no one would have known. Therefore, I argued, she had brought all this trouble on herself, and here we were being told we were naughty in front of everyone, and we weren't naughty. Why shouldn't we sell flowers? Anyone could think we were stealing. All this was flashing through my angry little heart when my aunt spoke to me. I stuck my hands in my pockets and stomped my muddy boot. I'm not a bit sorry, I said, and we're not doing anything wrong, and no one called us naughty until we met you. We've earned the money, and it belongs to us, and you shall go on doing it. We shall go on doing it if we want. You always spoil everything, Aunt Margaret. My aunt went quite white. Never in my worst moments at home had I spoken to her like this, and here I was disgracing us all in somebody else's front room. I suddenly felt terrible and miserable and ran out into the garden, leaving them all standing looking at each other. I wanted to dash on, but realized that they might think I was running away, and I was far too proud to run away, so I walked off towards home with my hands in my pockets and my head held very high in the air. I knew my aunt and Philip were coming down the hill behind me, so I pretended to whistle, but I was too miserable to keep it up for long. When I reached home, I went and stared out the kitchen window and tried to whistle again. I wanted to look as though nothing had happened, and as though I didn't care if it had. After all, I wasn't going to be sorry. My aunt came in slowly, as though she was very, very tired. She came and stood beside me, looking out the window. Ruth, she said slowly, I'm not going to punish you because it doesn't seem to do much good. But I've been thinking it out on the way home. I don't seem to be able to manage you or bring you up as I should. You have 10 days more of holiday, and then if they can take you, I'm going to send you to boarding school. Your mother suggested it at Christmas, but I wanted to keep you then. Of course, it will be a big extra expense, but anything is better than to have you grow up selfish and stubborn and bad-mannered as you are now. She turned away without looking at me, and I went on staring out the window. I felt as the whole world was falling down around me, and I wanted to run to Philip and bury my face in his sweater and cry as I used to when I was a tiny girl. But Philip had been sent straight upstairs to bed, and I was alone. I shan't go, I said, which was meant to be a strong voice, but it only sounded small and shaky. You won't be asked, replied my aunt quietly. There was a long silence, and I stood perfectly still, thinking furiously. Then I spoke again in a small, still, trembling voice that tried so hard to be proud. Very well, I answered. I shall run away, and I shan't come back. And with that, I ran straight out the door and into the road. My aunt took no notice. It was very early, and I often rushed off like this in a temper. No doubt I would come back before dark. She sighed heavily and went slowly up to her room. Tomorrow we'll read chapter 8, and the title is Running Away. Good night. I love y'all.